My ears were piqued a few times because we've now said the word inflation like two or three times, the global economy. And I feel like we're in this like weird gray area, this like, I guess some people call it stagflation, where there's higher costs, but slower growth. Um, there are talks of recession. Um, what is that versus a market correction? Speaking of talking about buying a dip in a market correction can be a good thing. Buying the dip in a sustained down economy or a sustained lower markets, that depends how long you're holding things. So like, where are we? Like, I feel like we're in this weird gray area. We're not really even sure to call what's going on in the economy.
Yeah, the price of um, my favorite dip at the supermarket has gone up by like 30%, right? And so talking of buying the dip, it is Friday and I will have to make it some of the grocery store and I'm not looking forward to that because I'm going to be paying 30% more for everything that I'm going to buy today as opposed to just a few months ago.
I think
So,
we peaked inflation the highest in 40 years.
right.
So I'm not going to call us out, but that may or may not have been in our lifetime.
Uh, yeah, it's true. Listen, I think there are quite a few things that are going on in the world today. And some of those things have been going on for now a few years. Obviously, we had the COVID pandemic that happened, in the early part of 2020, and we still are working our way through that. But during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, we poured a lot of money into the economy to just keep things very stable, right? I mean, we wanted to control unemployment. So we offered businesses the Paycheck Protection Program, and then the emergency loan program that was called EIDL, that was through FEMA. The PPP was through the Small Business Administration. We also, for self-employed people who all of a sudden were out of work, we extended unemployment benefits, which is not which is not usually how that goes. Self-employed individuals typically are not eligible for unemployment, and then on top of that, we the uh, offered additional benefits. On top of that, there was obviously the various uh, stimulus checks that we offered as well. And so we poured a lot of money into into the economy. And so what's happened now is that we overheated the economy. And so now we're kind of in the cooling off period, right? I mean, for a brief amount of time, we all heard stories of people who, were not interested in working because they were getting more money through the various programs. The unemployment checks in some instances were more than what they were making at their jobs. And so if you have this benefit, why would you want to go back to work? And so, while I think those programs were well-meaning and those programs were well-intentioned and really did sort of, help the economy, now that those programs have run out, people have begun, people are beginning to go back to work, and that's why we see some overall positive news in the unemployment numbers and the number of jobs being added. So we are now in this scenario where we're kind of like in the cooling off period. And if you look at the last sort of 12 months or so, the economy grew at about 5%, 5.5%. And that is very aggressive. That is incredibly aggressive growth. And so some of these things are just based on that. Not to mention that we have a war, between Ukraine and Russia that is ongoing. We're still dealing with some ramifications of COVID-19 and some issues with that, and depending on where you are in the country, that may still be. We're heading into the summer vacation months where travel typically goes up. That's going to increase some gas prices. Even if there was no war, gas prices would be on the rise in the summer months. There's just a lot going on. There's obviously some tariffs. We have a supply shortage, or at least had a supply shortage of various goods. The tariffs that were announced during the Trump administration. So there's so many things that have happened, and there has been monkeypox in the news in the last few weeks. So there's so many things going on, that all of those things taken into consideration is kind of what has led us to where we are with incredibly high inflation.
And when we're talking about cooling off, the Fed is trying to cool off the hot inflation. They just raised interest rates at 50 basis points. That was the first time they did that in, I think it was 22 years. But it's sort of like, when you're at your house and it's really hot in your house, and so you turn on the air and you think, if I just drop it to like 65, it's going to go faster and get to where I want faster. But in all reality, no matter what you put that thermostat at, it's going to just take the time it's going to take to cool off the house. Like, you could just put it on 72 and then down to 68 or whatever it is you want. And it's going to take the same amount of time, because it's not going to like go faster just because you wanted it to. Is the Fed trying to speed up this process of cooling it off? They talked about continued, 50 basis points raises. Is speeding up that process going to help us get to where we want to be, like keeping us at a stable, even pace? Or it's sort of like what's in motion will sort of stay in motion?
My view is, Emily, that I think what's in motion will stay in motion. I mean, I think trying to the market's going to do what the market's going to do. It's just one of those things.
Does
Um,
of its own sometimes. It's like,
yeah, I mean,
right?
yeah, I mean, listen, the only person that had any kind of significant influence on our economy was Alan Greenspan, because when he went to Congress and testified, people listened and people would react in more often than not real time. Well, he's no longer guiding our monetary policy, and so the folks that have come after him, good as they are, you know, Jay Powell um, and everybody else, you know, they're they're not him. And while they are as good as they are, the market doesn't react to when they make any kind of monetary uh, policy changes or statements. So at the end of the day, the market is going to do what the market's going to do. But you used the example of a house, right? And I like to cook, right? And oftentimes when I'm cooking and I'm in front of the stove and in front of the oven, I get hot, right? Because I have all these things going on that are contributing to the heat. And so if it's, when I start cooking, it might be 72 in the house, but when I'm done cooking and hopefully I don't burn the house down, it might be at 78, 79 because I'm opening the oven, I might be doing a whole bunch of things. And so what you have to do in an instance like that is, perhaps you turn the AC on, but if you keep cooking And even though you have the AC on, it's going to take a little bit longer time because there's still things contributing to the internal heat. So then maybe you open the windows and perhaps you turn the fan on, and perhaps, it doesn't necessarily make it so that it doesn't necessarily make it so that um, it may not reduce the temperature in the house as quickly as you want it to. But those things in combination, turning the AC on, turning the fan on, maybe having the windows open, make things comfortable. And so, um, all the policies, whether it is increasing the interest rates or whether it is getting rid of tariffs or any other option that might be on the table, all options should be on the table, and they should all be sort of thought of as, in a holistic way to sort of make things comfortable for minimally the next 12 months. Because if we are heading into a recession, and by talking about a recession, we may actually talk ourselves into a recession, just like we have talked ourselves into inflation. By talking about a recession, if that is where we're headed, we're probably not coming out of it for until at least, the second or third quarter of 2023. So 12 months may seem like a short amount of time, but if you're hurting because your paycheck isn't going as far as you'd want it to go because you're paying more for gas and you're paying more for groceries and all of those things, um, you know, uh, 12 months can be a long time. And so, to the extent that we can ease the pain, we should look at all those things in a holistic way and try to implement those at the national level as much as we can.
Right, like a multi-prong approach, that it's not just going to be one thing that sort of corrects the whole picture. And I think a lot of economists are saying, like, no, not a recession now, maybe in 18 months. But a recession isn't necessarily all bad all the time. Like you said, inflation is really high. We're paying a lot for the same things that we were buying just a few months ago. We're paying more for those things. I know that with like you said, the grocery bill, when you go out to eat, gas. I live across the bridge from New Jersey, and I go across the bridge, and it's still not as much of a discount as I want from gas prices. But it doesn't necessarily mean recession is all bad. And a recession that we would be headed towards now wouldn't necessarily look like the most recent one we all recall and lived through, which was, the Great Recession. And I think we have a very specific picture in our minds about what recession is. And it may not be the type of recession that we would experience if one is coming. They're not all created equal, right?
They're not all created equal, but what I fear for Emily is external events that are not in our control, right? I mean, if we maintain the status quo, which is really hard, but if we maintain the status quo, and there are no more external events, then we would be fine. I mean, a lot of things look different from the year 2000 and 2008 and now into 2022. We are finding that sort of more people are working for themselves, so they may not be dependent on a regular paycheck to begin with. That might be one thing. I think people who are sort of from our generation may have built some savings, and so we can sort of weather the storm a little bit better. There are so many things, but if you look at the year 2000, for example, we obviously had the tech bubble that sort of burst, and things would have been fine. If you look at the numbers, things were moving along on the path to recovery quite well until 9/11 happened, right? And that obviously made the country go into a much bigger and much longer sustained uh, uh, economic slowdown and recession. And so those are the kinds of events that I sometimes worry about, of sort of what's on the horizon, and in this country, obviously, we have some challenges of our own, but uh, one of the things that we like to do every couple of years, as sort of a self-inflicted wound, is have an election. So we're constantly in an election cycle, right? And now we have the midterms coming up in November, and if depending on sort of what happens in that midterm election, and I'm not even going to read the tea leaves because I just to me, but um, those people will take office in January, and then that will change some. That may lead to some financial policy modifications as well. For example, if the Democrats lose control of both the House and the Senate, and it is let's say in January next year, it is in Republican hands. Any of the spending bills that are passed, may obviously look a little bit different than if the Democrats uh, were in charge. And so those are some things that, and then obviously, because we're in a constant election cycle, pretty much as soon as January of 2023 hits, we're going to start thinking about the presidential election and the uncertainty in markets that happen from all of that. And so there's just so many things that are just not in anybody's control. And if any of those things uh, were to sort of burst up in a negative way, and I don't mean that uh, the 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 Senate and the House uh, control changing would be a bad thing, but if we imagine a scenario where there is um, some dissatisfaction with the election results, and that leads to riots or any of it's it's those things that you know uh, can sort of lead to sort of like a ripple effect, and depress the markets even more.